Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're diving into a huge shift happening around the world, aging populations, and how that intersects with Christian mission. So we'll be looking at two articles from the Lausanne Movement to help guide our conversation, but we're going deep here. We want to understand how the church can really step up to the challenges and the opportunities that this kind of demographic earthquake brings, especially for fulfilling the Great Commission. And just to give you a sense of the scale of this, by 2050, get this. There will be more grandparents on the planet than children under 15.
Wow. That's a powerful image.
Yeah.
It really does show the scale of this change. And this isn't just a temporary thing, is it? It's a huge shift. And it's going to last. I mean, the UN has called it unprecedented. Never before in history have we had so many people living such long lives.
It really is uncharted territory. And when you look at the actual numbers, it's pretty mind-blowing. Like by 2100, the number of people over 60 is projected to be 3.2 billion.
3.2 billion.
That's more than triple what it was in 2020.
Yeah. And those numbers, well, they have real-world implications, don't they? It makes you think about healthcare systems being strained, you know, and economies having to adapt to shrinking workforces, potentially even shifts in social structures and cultural norms. It's almost like we have to rethink everything we thought we knew about how society works.
Okay, so just imagine this. By 2050, those aged 65 and older will actually outnumber children under 5 by more than 2.5 to 1. Now, societies are usually built around a younger population, right? So how do we even begin to adjust to a world where older generations are the majority?
That's a really big question a lot of people are trying to figure out. But beyond all the practical stuff, there's another challenge that both of our sources bring up. Ageism. The World Health Organization defines it as discrimination based on someone's age. And it's a lot more common than you might think. It even finds its way into the church.
It's interesting you say that because just the other day, I was with a friend, and she was telling me how she feels invisible at church now that she's retired. Like her experience and wisdom just aren't valued anymore. It made me wonder, how many times have I, maybe without realizing it, dismissed someone's ideas simply because of their age?
Yeah, that's a great example of how ageism can be so subtle. It's almost unconscious. We push older people to the sidelines, forgetting all the knowledge and experience they have.
And it's fascinating. It's almost like this issue clashes with all those clear instructions we see in the Bible about how we're supposed to treat older people. It's not just about good manners, is it? It's really core to living out our faith.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And it goes beyond just honoring your parents, right? Like in 1 Timothy 5.1, Paul specifically tells us to treat older men as fathers and older women as mothers. It's a call to see them as important members of our family of faith. They deserve our respect and care.
Exactly. And then there's the book of James, the one that says caring for widows is pure and faultless religion. But one of our sources takes it a step further. It suggests that God's care for widows in the Bible can actually be a model for how we care for all elderly people.
Oh, that's interesting. What a great point. So how does the article break that down?
Well, it breaks God's care for widows into 5 parts. Protect, provide, include, show compassion, and execute justice. And what I find fascinating is how these principles can be directly applied to the challenges that lots of older people face today.
Oh, I see. So it's not just abstract ideas.
No, it's about taking action. For example, protect could mean speaking up for policies that prevent elder abuse. Or provide could involve setting up programs to make sure seniors have enough to eat.
That makes a lot of sense. And what about include?
Well, include could mean actively making sure older adults are part of church activities and that they're involved in decision-making so they feel valued and heard. Yeah, it's like these principles give us a practical way to address both the spiritual and the physical needs of older people. It's turning those biblical teachings into a roadmap.
I like that. A roadmap.
It's really encouraging. There are already ministries around the world putting these principles into action. One that comes to mind is Reach One, Touch One Ministries in Uganda. They do so much for seniors there, healthcare, medical care, programs to combat loneliness, and just feeling isolated. It's amazing to see how, even with limited resources, this ministry is making a real difference in the lives of older people in Uganda. And they're doing it by living out those biblical principles.
Wow. It shows that even small acts can have a big impact. Especially when they're rooted in faith and compassion.
It's a good reminder that we don't have to start from scratch. We can look to the scriptures for inspiration and guidance as we try to meet the needs of an aging world.
Yeah, it's true. But we also have to acknowledge that there are challenges with this demographic shift, right? Both for society in general and for the church.
That's a great point. We've been talking about our duty to care for the elderly, but let's be real. this aging population also presents some tough challenges.
Absolutely. We've touched on some of them already, like ageism and the strain on healthcare. But then there's things like elder abuse, the financial pressure of caregiving, and the growing problem of loneliness and isolation, especially in cultures where, family structures are changing.
Yeah, one of the sources mentions a really sad example of this: rising suicide rates among older adults in rural China. It just shows you how much emotional and spiritual needs often go unmet in aging populations, even in cultures that usually revere their elders.
That is heartbreaking. It really highlights the urgent need for the church to step up, not just for physical needs, but for emotional and spiritual needs too.
But here's the thing, even with these challenges, there are some amazing opportunities, especially when we look at it through the lens of the Great Commission.
Oh, that's a good point. It's easy to get stuck on the difficulties. We have to remember that this shift also gives us a unique chance to fulfill the Great Commission in a way we maybe haven't seen before.
Okay, now this is where things get really interesting.
Oh, I can tell by your voice. What is it?
Research is showing that people tend to be more interested in spiritual matters as they get older. And when you combine that with this growing number of older adults who are living longer lives, it's like we have a whole new mission field opening up.
You're right. That's an important point. We often focus on younger generations, which is important, of course. But what you're suggesting is, well, are we overlooking a large group of people who are actually more open to spiritual things than ever?
Exactly. And it's not just about sharing the gospel with them. It's about preparing them to share their faith with others. They have so much wisdom and experience they can share. They could be really powerful witnesses for Christ, especially in a world that's increasingly skeptical of religion.
That is fascinating. We're so used to thinking of younger people as the leaders in missions. But maybe older adults are the key to reaching those who haven't heard the gospel in the 21st century. With all their life experiences and spiritual maturity, they could be incredibly effective at connecting with people who wouldn't respond to the traditional ways of sharing our faith.
It's like we're turning everything we thought we knew about missions upside down. And the best part is, we don't have to start from zero. There are already ministries and organizations doing a great job of reaching and serving older adults.
That's true. Any examples come to mind?
Well, there's Duconia in Spain. They offer a bunch of programs for older adults, everything from health and wellness programs to cultural trips. And then there's 105 Gibson Center in Canada. It was started by a local church. And now they provide a whole range of services. They combine faith and action. They have fitness classes, art programs, a food bank, even a medical clinic.
Wow. It sounds very holistic.
It is. And these are just a couple of examples. The point is, there are models out there we can learn from. We can adapt them to our own situations.
So what's the key takeaway then?
The key is to be creative, to use our resources well, and to be intentional about reaching this growing part of the population.
And we need to change how we think, right? We need to stop seeing older people just as people who need help.
Right.
And start recognizing them as valuable parts of the body of Christ. They have so much to contribute to the mission of the church.
I think that's a good place to pause for now.
Yeah, I agree. We've covered a lot of ground already. But there's still so much more to talk about. I'm looking forward to getting into it more after the break.
Me too. I think this is going to be a fascinating deep dive, and I can't wait to share more with our listeners after the break. Stay tuned.
We'll be right back. It's interesting, isn't it, how we see aging? It's often shaped by our culture. In some cultures, older people are really respected for their wisdom and experience, and in others, they're seen as a burden.
It's true. And I think sometimes those ideas about aging can even creep into the church. Like, we might, without realizing it, adopt a view of aging that's more from the culture around us than from biblical principles.
Yeah, you're right. That's why it's so important to base how we understand aging on what the Bible says.
Yeah.
When we look at Scripture, we see this constant emphasis on the value and the dignity of older people.
Absolutely. One verse that always comes to mind for me is Proverbs 20.29. It says, "The glory of young men is their strength, but the splendor of old men is their gray hair."
It's such a beautiful image.
Yeah.
It speaks to the unique beauty and value of each season of life.
It is a beautiful verse. It reminds us that getting older isn't something to be afraid of. It's not something to try and avoid. It's a natural part of life, a glorious part of life even. And when we really grasp that, it changes how we approach ministry to and with older people.
It does. It's about seeing them as partners in ministry, not just as problems to be solved.
Right.
They have gifts, they have experiences that can really make the church richer and help advance the kingdom. Exactly. Yeah. And it brings us back to that idea of this new mission field among older adults. We talked about the research that suggests that as people get older, they become more interested in spiritual matters. But the Pew Research Center has also found that 84% of adults worldwide say religion is important in their daily lives.
84%.
Yeah,
That's huge. It tells us that there's this vast potential for spiritual growth and discipleship among older people.
it really does. And think about the role that grandparents are playing these days, with families being spread out more, and those traditional support systems kind of breaking down. Grandparents are often stepping in, providing care and guidance for their grandchildren.
That's so true. It's like they're becoming the spiritual foundation of the family in a lot of cases. They have the time, the wisdom, and often a very deep faith. They can really make a difference in their grandkids' lives.
They can. And it makes me wonder, are we doing enough to equip and empower them to take on this spiritual leadership role?
I think that's a question we all need to be asking ourselves. If we believe that this demographic shift is like a new frontier for missions, then we need to start thinking strategically about how we can help older adults reach their families, their communities, even the world, with the gospel.
We do. It's a call to action, isn't it? To see this shift not as a burden, but as an opportunity to unleash the potential of a generation that is often overlooked and underestimated.
It is, and it's not just about sending them overseas as missionaries, although that's definitely a possibility. It's about recognizing that the mission field is right here in our own backyards.
Exactly. It's about seeing the older adults in our churches, in our neighborhoods, in our families as potential missionaries, mentors, people who can make disciples.
I agree. We've talked a lot about the opportunities, but I think it's also important to acknowledge the challenges that come with engaging older adults in missions.
Of course. Yeah. We can't ignore the realities of aging. Some older adults might have health issues or financial limitations, even cultural barriers. All of those things might make it hard for them to take part in, the traditional ways we think of missions.
And there's still that issue of ageism within the church that we talked about before. If older adults feel like they're pushed to the side or not valued, they're not going to want to step into leadership roles or feel like they can share their faith.
You're right. Churches need to create a culture of inclusion and respect, a culture where older adults feel valued and where their contributions are celebrated.
One thing that really struck me in the articles was the emphasis on needing both practical and spiritual care for older adults. It's not enough to just meet their physical needs. We also have to address their emotional and spiritual needs.
Absolutely. And that's where those 5 parts of God's care for widows that we talked about earlier can be so helpful. Protect, provide, include, show compassion, and execute justice. They give us a framework for ministering to older adults in a holistic way.
Yeah. For example, protecting older adults could mean supporting policies that protect their rights and prevent elder abuse. And providing could mean setting up systems to help with things like food insecurity, loneliness, making sure they have access to health care.
And including could mean really making an effort to create opportunities for older adults to be a part of church activities, to be involved in decision-making, even to take on leadership roles.
And showing compassion is so important, recognizing the unique challenges that come with aging and responding with empathy, patience, and understanding.
Yes.
And executing justice could mean addressing those big picture issues that contribute to older adults being marginalized.
Like ageism in the workplace or inadequate social safety nets.
It's a lot to think about, but it's exciting to think about how the church can be a place of hope and support for older adults in a world that often ignores them or dismisses them.
It is an exciting vision, and it's one that I believe is really at the heart of who God is. He values and cherishes every stage of life, and he calls us to do the same.
And speaking of God's heart for the elderly, let's go back to that thought-provoking question you asked earlier about the potential for a new missions frontier, focused specifically on people aged 70 to 100. What made you think of that?
Well, as we were talking about older adults being more interested in spiritual matters and the special role that grandparents are playing in families, it just hit me that we might be missing a huge opportunity to involve this group of people in missions. We put so much effort into reaching younger generations, which is so important. But what if we put that same energy and creativity into reaching older adults?
I think it's a brilliant idea. It fits perfectly with what we've been saying about how we need to change our thinking. We need to stop seeing older adults as people who just need to be taken care of and start seeing them as active participants in the mission of the church.
Right. Imagine the impact it could have. These are people who have lived full lives, who have so much wisdom, and often they have a deep faith to draw from. They could be amazing at reaching their peers, at mentoring younger generations. They could even be ambassadors for Christ in different cultures, in a world that really needs to hear a message of hope and redemption.
No, it's like a whole new chapter in the story of missions is starting, and older adults are ready to play a leading role.
And it's not just about sending them to other countries, although that could happen too. It's about empowering them to live out their faith in their families, their communities, wherever God calls them.
It's a challenge to the church, isn't it? To see the potential in older adults and to create space for them to use their gifts and their experiences to build God's kingdom.
It is a challenge,
Yeah.
but it's also an amazing opportunity.
Mm.
And I really believe that if we embrace this opportunity, we're going to see God do incredible things through older adults. They have wisdom, experience, faith, and they're ready to be unleashed for God's glory.
I love that phrase, unleashing the potential of older adults for God's glory. It's a powerful vision, and it's something I think we should all be working towards. But it's not just up to churches and organizations to make this happen. Each of us can play a role in supporting and empowering the older adults in our lives.
That's right. It could be something as simple as visiting an elderly neighbor or volunteering at a senior center or just making an effort to have more meaningful conversations with the older people we know.
And let's not forget the power of prayer. We can pray for God to show us the needs of older adults in our communities, to give us wisdom and compassion in how we serve them, and to empower them to live out their faith in bold and impactful ways.
Amen to that. As we finish up, I want all our listeners to think about what they've learned and how they can put these ideas into practice in their own lives and communities.
It has been a fascinating conversation. I hope it sparked some new ideas and maybe inspired some action.
It has for me. It's always a joy to talk about these important topics with you.
I agree. So with that, we've come to the end of our deep dive into global aging and missions. Thanks for joining us on this journey. It's been a really insightful exploration. Now, as we close, I want to leave you with one final thought to consider. What if, instead of seeing aging as a problem to be fixed, we saw it as an invitation to tap into this incredible source of wisdom, experience, and faith that can revitalize the church and bring hope to a world that desperately needs it?
That is a powerful invitation, and I believe that if we respond with open hearts and a willingness to serve, we'll discover that the later years of life aren't just about decline. They're a time of incredible potential, a time for flourishing, for making a difference, for leaving a legacy that will impact generations to come.
Thank you for joining us on the deep dive. It's been a really eye-opening conversation, and I hope it's been for you too.
It has. It's always a pleasure to discuss these important topics with you.
Until next time. It's amazing, isn't it, how much the world has changed? Even in the last, few decades. Everything's so much faster. Technology keeps changing. It's like there's this pressure to keep up, to stay relevant.
It's definitely a different world than the one a lot of older people grew up in.
Yeah.
And I think that can lead to feeling disconnected, like their experiences and wisdom aren't really valued anymore.
Exactly. But what if instead of seeing that as a problem, we saw it as an opportunity? Like, what if those very things that make older people feel out of touch are actually what equip them to be powerful agents of change in today's world?
I like that. It's like you're saying their challenges can actually become their strengths.
Think about it. They have a unique perspective. They've lived through so much change. They know what it means to adapt, to persevere, to find meaning even when things are uncertain. And those are qualities that are so needed in a world that feels so chaotic and lost sometimes.
That's true. It's like they have this well of resilience and wisdom that we can all draw from. They've seen trends come and go. They've been through tough times. They've learned from their mistakes. And they have this incredible ability to empathize and show compassion because they've walked a long road.
And they've often had to lean on their faith in a way that younger generations haven't. They've seen God's faithfulness through good times and bad, and that gives them this deep spiritual understanding that can be so grounding and inspiring.
Yeah, it's like they have this unshakable foundation. It lets them stay strong when things are hard, to offer hope when everyone else is feeling hopeless, and to point people to God who never changes in a world that's constantly changing.
You know, we talked earlier about the Bible's instructions to care for the elderly, but I think it goes both ways. We should honor and support them,
Right.
but we also have so much to learn from them.
Absolutely. It's a two-way street. It benefits both sides. When we invest in older adults, we're not just meeting their needs. We're investing in the future of the church, even the future of the world.
It's about recognizing that the generations are connected. We need each other. We all have something to contribute, and together we can make a difference that's much bigger than we could ever make on our own.
That's right. It's about creating a culture where we respect each other, where older adults' wisdom is valued and their voices are heard, and where younger generations feel like they can learn from their experience and journey with them in faith.
It's a beautiful picture. And I think we can make it a reality if we're willing to challenge our assumptions, to embrace the possibilities, and to work together to build a church in a world where every generation can thrive.
It's a challenge worth taking on. And as we move into this new era of a global aging population, I have this feeling that God is calling us to something really amazing, something that will not only be a blessing to older adults, but will transform the church and the world in ways we can't even imagine.
And as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with one last thought. What if, instead of seeing aging as a problem we have to solve, we saw it as an invitation to tap into this amazing source of wisdom, experience, and faith that can breathe new life into the church and bring hope to a world that so desperately needs it?
It is a powerful invitation. And I believe that if we answer that call with open hearts and willingness to serve, we'll find that those later years aren't just about decline, they're a time of incredible potential, a time for flourishing, for making a difference, for leaving a legacy that will touch future generations.
Thank you so much for joining us on the deep dive. This conversation has been so eye-opening for me, and I hope it has been for you too.
It has. It's always a pleasure to talk about these important issues with you.
Until next time.